Good afternoon and thanks for having us in. This morning, South Dakota lawmakers voted down a pair of controversial resolutions. HCR 6006 called for, quote, humane and fair treatment of defendants being held for their alleged involvement in the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol. Supporters brought a Texas man who was found guilty of his role in the attack as a witness. Opponents said it's a D.C. problem, not a South Dakota problem. The House State Affairs Committee voted unanimously to reject the measure. The committee also voted down HJR 5003, which would have had South Dakota voters decide to give people the right to refuse vaccines and other medical treatments without facing any consequences. Along with several late starts this morning, blowing snow is causing a handful of schools to send students home early. Marshall closed at 10:30 and Ivanhoe closed at 11:30, and the list is growing. You can find all of the closures on our clothesline on KELOLAND.com and scrolling on the bottom of the screen. We're also hearing about dangerous driving conditions in the Sioux Falls area. This is the view from DOT cameras on Interstate 29, just south of town. Minutes ago, Sioux Falls police sent out a tweet warning people that the blowing snow is causing area highways and the interstate to get slick. Turning now to a first look at our weather. Brian, do you think it's going to be windy the rest of the day? Is that going to be something we'll be talking about throughout the evening?
Well, I think for the afternoon, yes. Tonight, no. I think we're going to really back off on that wind. And I'll tell you what, I just came up from the Canton area here a little while ago. And I'll tell you what, it is a much different picture. Once you get outside the city limits, there's blowing snow right across the roads, and it is slippery. So all of that is definitely good advice to make sure you're watching the weather and keep an eye on some of those clothesline announcements as they pertain to certain areas of KELOLAND. Now, within all this mix of things to talk about, you know, Watertown, it's cleared out. There's some sunshine. The wind, though, is at, well, 23 miles per hour. And look at the temperature. It's down to 6 degrees. It's really been cooling off there. Now in Rapid City, we have a whole another batch of things to talk about. We had some snow this morning. That's kind of let up now. There's probably more coming down the pike here. We're up to 32, so we should make that 35 today. Now the advisories for snow extend just north of Rapid up to about Sturgis and Spearfish. And then winter storm warning. Now that's still in effect for the northern Black Hills. The train of systems. Isn't it interesting when you look at radar? You can even see right there, going right by the wall radar, there's a little curlicue right there in the middle of that screen in that animation. So these little eddies or these little waves are going to keep coming in from the northwest. Classic setup for more snow, the orographic lift that really enables that in the Black Hills. We see that a lot with this kind of pattern. Now, East River, a little more disorganized. You got more snow over into Minnesota, obviously. Let's check out our winds. So here at midday, we're at 18 in Sioux Falls, 26 Yankton, and it's just enough. It just picks it up out of those open rural farm fields, and it blows it across those rural highways and interstates. So cautionary note there, and it doesn't help when the temperature's dropping. See this? We're down to 10 in Mitchell now, and we're down to 12 degrees in Brookings. So that stuff tends to seize up a little bit more on the roads, and you're going to be more prone to black ice. So that's my 2 cents worth of thinking on that subject. Now, coming up, we have a whole nother set of laundry list, if you will, of things that go into tomorrow and tomorrow night. I'm going to explain that, and then we'll get to the weekend, too, coming up in just a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. Snow cleanup presses on even if a few days have passed without much new snow falling. This is a look at efforts this morning in East Sioux Falls. Dustin Hanson, street manager with the city, says they are still collecting snow that fell shortly after New Year's Day. You're going to hear from him later today on KELOLAND News. And with the vegetation buried deep under the snow, rabbits have fewer food options and are now getting their fill with tree bark. Damon Coughlin owns Oak Ridge Nursery and Landscaping in Brandon and says rabbits often target sweet-tasting trees.
They'll go after fruit trees. Flowering crabs are kind of their favorites, and any of those younger trees. Usually if you get an older, mature tree, they're not going to bother it as bad.
If your trees have been damaged by rabbits, we'll tell you if they'll survive this spring today on First at 4. The IRS is warning taxpayers that they should expect smaller refunds this next tax filing season. The IRS said in a news release that due to tax law changes, many taxpayers may find their refunds somewhat lower this year. An IRS official said that not all refunds for tax year 2022 will be lower than previous years, and individual tax situations can vary. This is due to pandemic relief measures that have been allowed to expire. A lawyer for former Vice President Mike Pence says about a dozen documents with classified markings were discovered at his Indiana home last week and turned over to the FBI. The revelation came just days after Pence claimed that he had been more responsible about documents than President Joe Biden. Two special counsels are investigating Mr. Biden and former President Trump for their handling of classified material. Ukrainian to has details from Capitol Hill.
The White House announced President Biden is authorizing the Pentagon to send U.S.-made M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine.
I would say to the Department of Defense, if you will greenlight a handful of Abrams tanks, it would be one of the most consequential decisions you've made in this effort to allow Ukraine to expel Russia.
The president's decision is a change in policy for the White House, which had previously said the Abrams tanks were too advanced to be effectively used in Ukraine.
Modern main battle tanks will provide highly maneuverable armored firepower that will help Ukraine liberate territory and keep pressure on the Russian aggressors. But as I've said repeatedly, time is of the essence.
A bipartisan group of senators met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who told them the tanks are essential in defeating a Russian counteroffensive that appears to be in the works.
The offensive that the Russians will bring, they're massing their troops and supplies and reinforcements right now, is so imminent that we need to provide these tanks.
The decision follows intense negotiations last week with NATO allies over the supply of tanks. Germany initially resisted, but will now follow suit and begin shipping Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine.
I think there's an increasing appreciation in Germany how important their role has become in helping Ukraine.
The move could not only help Ukraine fight off the planned Russian invasion, but is expected to help them launch a counteroffensive of their own to try to drive Russia out of the country. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Biden called German Chancellor Olaf Scholz as well as the leaders of the UK, France, and Italy to coordinate support for Ukraine.